Hello there. One of my favourite films of all time was a flop on initial release, and remained an obscure cult film for a couple of decades. It became a kind of acid test for taste amongst fans. If someone had seen it, and more importantly loved it, then you knew they had good taste. Eventually, word of mouth spread as far as the World Wide Web, where its popularity exploded and it was finally recognised as the classic it is. The film is The Princess Bride. Not a massive flop on initial release, making double its budget back, but it was still a disappointing performance for Studio 20th Century Fox, finishing 35th in the top-grossing films of 1987, despite a great reception from critics. The story of The Princess Bride began when legendary screenwriter William Goldman was asked by his daughters to tell them a bedtime story, with one wanting a story about a princess and the other about a bride. From there, he expanded this bedtime story into novel form, framing it as a lost novel of famed and entirely fictional author S. Morgenstern. Goldman acts as the book's editor rather than author, having apparently had the book read to him as a child, but when he finds a copy for his own son — Goldman didn't have a son — he is shocked to discover the book is actually a scathing political satire of Morgenstern's home country of Florin, also fictional.
Because I really wanted to write this for my children, and I couldn't make it work. I couldn't figure it out, and I was going to never write it. And then one day, I got the notion that I didn't write it. It was written by this other figure named Morgenstern.
The book he presents us with allowed him to add more dry humour and subtlety than one might find in a children's story from this period, and is what attracted Rob Reiner to the idea of a film adaptation. After the success of This Is Spinal Tap, while making Stand By Me, which would also go on to be a huge success, he discovered his was not the first request to make a version of the film, and that Fox had made an aborted attempt, buying the rights as far back as 1973.
20th Century Fox thought there might be a movie in Princess Bride, and just before we went into production, the head of Fox was fired.
After the project failed to get out of the blocks, Goldman bought back the rights, with other directors having gone nowhere, with the likes of Francois Truffaut, Robert Redford and Norman Jewison all trying and failing to make the film. Reiner turned to old friend and comedy-producing royalty Norman Lear for financial support, and met with Goldman to secure the rights. Goldman was reticent, having been through the process before, and telling Reiner on their first meeting,
"This is my baby. I want this on my tombstone. This is my favorite thing I've ever written in my life."
I've only liked two things I've ever written. I like Butch Cassidy and I like The Princess Bride.
A tense initial meeting, with Reiner convinced his pitch was going badly, eventually ended with Goldman loving his ideas and enthusiasm for the project, and agreeing to go ahead.
And he walked back in from the kitchen. He says, "I just think," he has this high squeaky voice, "I just think this is going great. I'm having the greatest time. I love it."
Reiner quickly cast his friends Billy Crystal and Christopher Guest as Miracle Max and Count Rugen respectively, both stars in their own right, but they still needed to find their two leading actors, Wesley and Buttercup, and also a giant. Reiner's early choice for Wesley was Cary Elwes, having seen him in Lady Jane.
Hold it. Is this a kissing book?
Wait, just wait.
And while he had the right Errol Flynn look,
unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent.
Was he funny? Reiner met with Elwes, and this worry was quickly alleviated, so he was in. Buttercup was a more difficult task, having auditioned many British and then American actors before Reiner and casting director Jane Jenkins were impressed by Robin Wright.
And then it described the most beautiful girl in all the world, which was you.
With Goldman describing her upon meeting her as being what he wrote. Andre the Giant was always Goldman's first choice for Fezzik the Giant, but working full-time for the then-named WWF posed a potential schedule conflict, so other tall actors were auditioned. Thankfully, Andre was free to do the film, likely due to the WWF recognising his appearance would act as free publicity for them, and so he was signed. Mandy Patinkin was cast as vengeful Spaniard Inigo Montoya.
I promise I will not kill you until you reach the top.
That's very comforting.
Wallace Shawn as Vicini.
You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Chris Sarandon as Prince Humperdinck.
And so I think no man in a century will suffer as greatly as you will.
And Carol Kane as Miracle Max's wife, Valerie.
Liar!
Get back, witch!
I'm not a witch, I'm your wife.
Patinkin and Elwes immediately began learning to fence for the 3 weeks before filming began, and all throughout filming, with their sword fight pushed fairly late in the shooting schedule to give them as much time as possible, 4 months in total, to practice, as Reiner and the actors did not want to use stunt doubles unless they had to. They ended up only using a double for the acrobatic leaps. The cast all got on famously, although Wallace Shawn was racked with nerves throughout shooting, convinced he was about to be fired, as he had heard that they had initially looked at Danny DeVito for the role.
We had done so many takes, it was all on you, and finally Rob goes, let's just take a break. We're just going to take a break. Let's take a breather, step away from the thing, and under your breath you're like, God, I hate this acting thing.
This nervousness helped Elwes' own nerves for his first job as a leading man. Filming took place mostly in England, with Haddon Hall in Derbyshire standing in for the castle. Shooting went fairly smoothly, but was not entirely without incident, with William Goldman ruining some takes by getting a little too involved in the action.
You had your headphones on, you went, what's that noise? I remember this.
Yeah.
And it was Bill. He was behind a giant toadstool doing some incantation, right?
And Reiner ruining some takes by getting too involved in the comedy.
And I started laughing. I'd laugh. I ruined 5 or 6 takes. Because...
Plus, Elwes breaking his foot while on a break from shooting, and one of the actors in the rodent of unusual size costume being arrested for drunk driving. There was also the physical problems Andre was having due to back surgery he had recently undergone, meaning they had to be creative about all the scenes of him carrying people. The big question, though, is it any good? And if you were paying attention when I said this was one of my favourite films of all time, you should be able to guess my answer is yes. The only negative thing I can say is some of the creature effects are a bit fake looking, but honestly, I don't care. It's a great story, with just the right mix of adventure, fun and comedy, plus heroism and heart. The love story is beautifully portrayed by Elwes and Wright. Inigo's journey for revenge is deeply emotional and heartbreaking, and its hilarious mix of dry wit and silly humour is pitch perfect. The addition of British comedy geniuses Mel Smith and Peter Cook in cameo roles are both fantastic.
Knowledge.
Buttercup is a fully formed character who has agency but is still in need of saving. Rugen and Humperdinck are perfect as the banal but insidious villains, and the supporting characters do their job brilliantly, even if Billy Crystal and Carol Kane do absolutely nothing to cover their American accents. It's inventive and subversive in a deconstruction of film long before meta-commentary was that commonplace. I think it continues to resonate with viewers for just these reasons, a beautiful, believable love story with well thought out and well-rounded characters in a faux medieval setting that feels very modern. To me, the idea that anyone could dislike this film is, quite frankly, unbelievable. And...
inconceivable!
Thank you. Goodbye.